Good. All right. So welcome to the second annual Father Charles Brandt Memorial Lecture. We had this idea as an organization last year just to sort of honor the legacy of Father Charles Brandt, who was a hermit priest who lived in Black Creek, British Columbia. And some of you might be very new to the world of hermits and hermitage, or even to Father Charles Brandt, but hopefully all of that will become clear in the next few minutes. And then I'm going to turn the time over to two really, really amazing human beings, Father Cyprian Consiglio and Father Dorathick Rajan, both of whom belong to monastic orders who have a lot to say about the hermit vocation, though they also live in community. So it'll be a good conversation about balancing solitude and community. All right. So the official letterhead for our lecture today. We have some board members with us too, and hopefully we'll get to introduce you all. But here's the schedule for today. So I'll say a few things about the theme of the lecture series. This year we're turning it into a lecture series. Last year we just had a single speaker, which was really great. And then I would like to introduce Father Charles very briefly, just so folks who might be new to his work, his legacy, give you a sense for that. Then I'll turn the time over to our speakers. I'll introduce them both at the same time, and then you guys can decide who would like to go first. They'll have about 20 to 30 minutes to speak, and then we'll open it up to some dialogue and discussion. We're recording this, so if you need to duck out, that's perfectly fine. It'll be available afterwards. But I think we're going to try to wrap it up after about 2 hours, if even we go that long. We'll just see how much our speakers have to say and how much we want to dialogue. Okay, so that's the procedure. Here, let me just say a quick word about the theme for our series. Hermitage as spiritual practice came to me as I think I was thinking about pilgrimage because I've done a couple of pilgrimages in my time, and I was thinking of this word hermitage in relation to pilgrimage. We often use the word hermitage as a noun, as a place, rather than a verb. And as you know, pilgrimage is a sacred journey that we undertake for whatever reason. And hermitage is something I would say could be similar. We tend to think of it as needing a location, a specific location, but any practice that involves some measure of solitude could be thought of as hermitage, as a spiritual practice. And so over the next month, we're going to have several speakers from very different backgrounds talk to us about this practice of hermitage. So on February 26th, Kathy Bentall, who's a co-founder of the Rivendell Retreat Center on Bowen Island and the Rivendell Hermitage, where I've spent a lot of time. On March 5th, we'll have Robert Rodriguez, who wrote the book of hermits. It's a whole history of hermits in the East and mostly the West, and Father Charles appears in that book. On March 26th, we're going to have a very interesting panel from Arizona. The Cascabel Conservation Association has a hermitage program, which I've spent a few days at, east of Tucson, Arizona. And it's a beautiful piece of land. And the vision came out of the life of a man named James A. Corbett, who was a pacifist Quaker and kind of a rabble-rouser. He began or co-founded the sanctuary movement during the time when all of the wars in Central America were sending refugees over the border, and the U.S. government basically refused to recognize their appeals for asylum. And so there was a lot of attempts to help these refugees get asylum. But he also, after that movement, he began this conversation about a more sacramental relationship to land. So we'll hear all about Jim Corbett and the legacy he's left there in Arizona on March 26th. So the link that you use to get to this meeting is the same link you can use for these next three. So I really hope you'll join us for those. Okay? And I'm happy to answer questions about that at the end of the conversation today. But let me just say a few words about Father Charles Brandt, who is the priest whose legacy the Charles Brandt Hermitage Society is working to preserve and to promote. So Father Charles Brandt was ordained a hermit priest, but early in his life, he had this first inkling of the desire to live a life of solitude or benefit from the life of solitude after reading On Walden Pond by Henry David Thoreau. And in an interview, he said, I got interested then in Henry David Thoreau. He went to the woods to find out what life was all about, and that was really quite exciting and a real challenge for me. And I wanted to do something like that. That was probably my first inroad into the hermit life. And though we wouldn't characterize Henry David Thoreau as a hermit, as you know, his experiment with solitude on Walden Pond was inspiring not just to the conservation movement, but a lot of the contemplatives across religious traditions. And so Father Brandt was born in Kansas City, Missouri in 1923. He studied biology and ornithology. If you go to our website, you'll see a lot of his photography of birds. He first he was first ordained in the Anglican tradition, so he went to the Nashotah House Seminary in Wisconsin. But after some discernment, transferred his ordination to the Roman Catholic Church and discerned his vocation as a monk. So he joined the Trappists in Iowa in 1956. But after meeting with Thomas Merton, the famous Trappist monk, he decided to join a small fledgling order of hermits on Vancouver Island. So in 1965, he joined the Hermits of St. John the Baptist on the Solom River and then eventually moved to the Oyster River. In 1966, he was ordained a hermit priest, which is a fairly rare vocation in the Diocese of Victoria, and spent decades on the Oyster River as a hermit priest, contemplative, and interreligious dialogue. So even though our two speakers and Father Charles Brandt were Roman Catholic, you're really talking about three people who have a very deep ecumenical relationship with other world religions, especially the Indian traditions, the Dharmic religions like Buddhism and Jainism and Hinduism. So this is not explicitly Catholic, though, of course, we're talking about people deeply rooted in the Roman Catholic tradition. Just to orient you a bit, the Oyster River is located in Black Creek on Vancouver Island. You can see that image there. And it's part of the Salish Sea bioregion, part of the Comox Nation territory. And it's what I would call the dry side of Vancouver Island, though they do get over 1,100 millimeters of rain per year. But you compare that down here to North Vancouver, we get 2,500 millimeters per year. So it's a bit of a difference ecologically. There's still quite a bit of conifer forest, but a lot of more open grassland and Gary oak and beautiful, lush river valleys, the Solom and the Oyster Rivers, for example, which Father Charles worked so hard to restore. These are salmon-bearing and still salmon-bearing, mostly thanks to the efforts of conservationists like Father Charles. And Father Charles, as a priest and as a hermit, his life was very active and he was involved with a lot of conservation efforts. This is one of my favorite quotes in the letters between Father Charles and Thomas Merton. So he eventually did meet Thomas Merton, who, if you don't know, was a very famous Trappist monk who wrote many, many beautiful contemplative books, including his autobiography, The Seven-Story Mountain. But he went to Gethsemane, which is Merton's monastery. But you can see Merton there in front of the hermitage that was built for him after he threw it, many, many tantrums about wanting to live in solitude. And before this, Father Brandt met Thomas Merton. And he said, so at Easter, I went to Gethsemane. So this is Charles Brandt. I knew Merton was the novice master. I didn't realize I was going to meet him. I was in the guest house for about a week. So I hear this knock on the door, and in enters Thomas Merton. He sat down there, just the most ordinary person in the world. Immediately, I liked him, really liked him as a person, and we talked. My intent was to enter the novitiate there, but he said, "Don't come here. We could make a good monk of you, but not a good contemplative." Right. So it's a little controversial of Merton to say this, but at the time, Gethsemane was expanding. They were kind of industrializing their farming, and Merton had his sights on more contemplative orders like the Carthusians or the Camaldolese in Italy. And so Father Charles Brandt spent over 15 years at a Trappist monastery in Iowa before he moved to Vancouver Island. And he joined the Hermits of St. John the Baptist, as I mentioned. This was kind of an exciting experimental approach. In the 1960s, there was a lot of revival in the Benedictine vocation about rediscovering the roots of monasticism. And this order popped up on the Solom River. Half a dozen men joined the order, among them Charles Brandt. You can see Charles in the back here. And you can see here a picture of Charles with the founder, Jacques Winandi. And he was a Belgian priest, a Benedictine, who founded the order, who spearheaded it, but eventually moved back to Belgium to be a hermit. So the Solom River community folded, and he moved back to Belgium eventually, whereas Father Charles moved to the Oyster River, which is not too far from the Solom. And he spent some decades traveling as a bookbinder and as a restorationist for documents, but eventually Father Charles returned to the Oyster River, and his ashes are there at the Hermitage. And in that same interview, this is how he sees himself in relation to that place. He says, in a way, I'm looking toward eternity now. At the time, I'll be 93 on February 19th, 2016, so I'm not going anywhere. I love this spot. I'm permanent. I feel steady in a sense, with life and with my calling, and this is my place. I walk out and I know the trees, I know the birds and the animals. They're my friends. As I said, the human community and the rest of the natural world has to go into the future as a single sacred community. I feel that I'm part of this community where the natural world and people come and go. And if we don't, as Thomas Berry says, we'll perish. So here you can see a picture of the Hermitage. That's actually my car there at the Hermitage in Black Creek. And Father Charles purchased about 27 acres, and now it's basically public property. It's a park, or soon to be a park, with a restrictive covenant, so a conservation easement equivalent in Canada. And the society, the Hermitage Society, is we protect the structure of the Hermitage and the archive of Charles' letters and life in his library. And we host people for meditations and have a contemplative in residence program, which is one of the ways you could get involved. If you sign up, you can sign up for the newsletter, you can come to our meditations, you could apply to be a contemplative in resident. You could even join our board of directors or volunteer your talents with us. And we would, of course, very much love to see you there. And so here's a picture of Charles in his 90s. He always hosting visitors and guiding meditations at the back porch of the Hermitage, which is a very, very holy place. All right, so that's the very, very short introduction to Father Charles. And this lecture series is about honoring his life. And oh, and I can see in the chat that Emily McGill has posted, which is who is participating in our Contemplative in Residence program. Thank you so much, Emily, for posting that. I was about to do that as well. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Let me just quickly um, see if I can spotlight these folks for you here. There we go. There we go. All right. Hopefully everyone can see now. Are two very, very prestigious and prominent contemplatives in the world of contemplation. I went to a conference on contemplation once, and there was a lot of famous contemplatives there, and I said that it was a who's who of aspiring nobodies because everyone's there. Everyone who's there is trying to, learn this art of letting go of the self and to unify with the divine. All right, so without further ado, Father Cyprian Consiglio is a Camaldolese monk. He is formerly the prior of New Camaldolese Hermitage in California and is now based in Rome as the Secretary General of Monastic Interreligious Dialogue. New Camaldolese Hermitage was founded in 1958 from the mother house in Camaldolese in Tuscany in Italy. And the Camaldolese order is one of the oldest in Europe, founded by Saint Romuald in the 10th century. And I was fortunate enough to meet Father Cyprian during my dissertation research in December of 2015 and have been back many times to New Camaldolese Hermitage. Father Cyprian is also a writer and a talented musician. I don't have time to go through his discography and his bibliographies, but I will say he does have a new book out called Epiphanies of Nature and Grace, 12 Meditations for a Life in Dialogue, which I would highly recommend. And then Father Dorathick Rajan is also a Camaldolese monk and the prior of what is called Satchitananda Ashram, which is also called Shantivanam. It's an ashram monastery in Tamil Nadu, India. So it's a kind of an infusion of both the Benedictine vocation and the Sannyasin ethos and Vedantin philosophy. It was founded in 1950 by two French priests, and eventually Father Bede Griffiths, who you might have heard of, was a Benedictine monk and an inspiration for Father Charles. He visited in 1958, but eventually took over as prior. And so these are both really important centers of contemplative spirituality and of this conversation about the spiritual benefits of solitude. So I'd love to turn it over to either of you, whoever would like to start.
You want me to go first, Dorathick?
Yes, Cyprian, please go ahead.
Good morning, good to see you. Thanks, Jason. Yeah, what I thought I'd do is give you a little bit of my own history, my own background with solitude especially over the past 33 years that I've been with the Camaldolese, but even going back a little earlier than that. Are you hearing me okay, Jason?
Yes, yeah, you sound good.
But I wanted to share with you first this quote from Catherine Dweck Doherty. My first experiences with solitude, oddly enough, came in the middle of uptown Chicago. The year after high school, I had joined this group of Franciscan friars who were aiming to live a contemplative life in the middle of the city of Chicago, which was fascinating. And they wanted to live poor with the poor, contemplatives poor with the poor. They even practiced what we call nowadays a desert day, like one day a week where we'd have just total silence and kind of wandering the streets as well. We're affiliated with the Catholic worker movement that also had a house about a mile away in uptown Chicago. And at the time, several of us, or people who were my elders especially, had read this beautiful book by Catherine Dweck Doherty, She had a place called Madonna House in Canada, trying to recover what's called the Pustinic tradition of Russia. The Pustinia is basically a hermitage as well. But the definition I remember the most about the Pustinic tradition was like somebody was a hermit with the door open, which is very interesting. And I want to make that distinction right from the beginning, even for us as Camaldolese, the difference between a hermit and a recluse. Uh, a recluse is someone who really gets totally cut off from society in every way possible. We had a nun here, a Camaldolese nun here named Sister Nazarena, who is still very well known in Benedictine circles. People come and have pilgrimages to her cell all the time. She lived here too in the middle of the city, in the top floor of the monastery, the women's monastery, right across the Circus Maximus from us. She was a recluse, so she never came out of her cell. People brought food to her. She attended mass, through a window and things like that. And we have that possibility in our Camaldolese congregation too, of people being totally cut off. When I first joined New Camaldoli, there were two recluses. They would come out of their cell to get supplies and things like that, but they never joined the community for meals or for liturgies except for the high holy days of Holy Week. As opposed to that, the hermit, in our tradition especially, the accent is on solitude and silence, but just like the Carthusians, we still have liturgies in common together, for instance. But our place in New Camaldoli, the reason it's considered a hermitage is because each monk actually has a separate little cabin with its own enclosed garden. And it's this beautiful balance of community and solitude. And I'll say something about the genius of that from St. Rami a little bit later, perhaps. So anyway, this is my first experience of the practice of, as Jason said, hermitage, a spiritual practice, came through us reading this book, Pustinia. And at the same time, this is 1976, 1977, I was friends with a priest who was working in a rural Black African American parish south of Chicago, about 50 miles south of Chicago. And he actually found a little cabin, a little shack, basically, in the middle of a farmer's field that he designated as a pustinia. So I would go down there and work with him on weekends, and then we would all take these desert days in this pustinia. So this alternating between very strong contemplative practice and activity came very natural to me from early on. I was 18 years old. That's the pattern I learned quite quickly. It wasn't just about being completely cut off from the whole world, but about somehow having that silence and solitude as the core of the practice, then coming out from there. I've been reading lately lots of things about the Taoist tradition. The Taoist tradition is a great history of hermits, the Chinese hermits. If you find some of the writings of David Hinton, he's translated a lot of their poetry as well. And this is talking quite a bit from the Taoist tradition of the Tao Te Ching itself and the Neye, which is considered a writing even older than Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, and also Chuang Tzu, the successor of Lao Tzu, about this alternation. It's like the contemplative is the one who actually should be called upon to govern the world. Like the emperor should be called out of somebody who's a deep contemplative, because it's that tradition, that practice of solitude that's somehow giving you an insight into reality. This was a very big theme in ancient China, that these philosophers, these wandering philosophers, were trying to convert people to be the governors of these different kingdoms, but they were looking for the wise one to do it. So I'm already distracted perhaps from my path. Back to this idea of Pustinia. And I want to share this with you. Years later, in 2002, I wound up getting a beautiful little cabin in the woods in Santa Cruz, California. So at that point, I'm 54 years old. I first went into Catholic Dorathick at 18. And then I walk into this cabin where I would wind up living for 9 years. And a quote from that very same book was on the wall of the cabin the first time I walked into it. And somehow I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. And this is a quote that's carried me for beyond these, almost 50 years. I had to write to some hermit friends of mine in California to find this quote because I don't have my books here with me in Italy. It starts right there. Truly, the desert will strip you. The Lord of the desert will do that too. You'll be tempted even as he was tempted. It is to remember that you're going to the desert for the following reasons. Maybe I should have prefaced this by saying there's a reason not to be a hermit. There's lots of reasons not. And when people ask me to talk about solitude, I've given talks to different monastic communities at times, including the Trappists. And I usually spend about the first 40 minutes talking about the downside of solitude, like, you know, about the dangers of it. It's such an easy escape route. It's not because you're an introvert. It's not because you're tired of community. It's not because you don't like liturgy anymore. It's not because you want to do what you want to do when you want to do it and you don't want anybody to tell you what to do. It's not so you can surf through the internet whenever you want to. That's not a hermit. This is why and this connection between hermit and desert, hermitage and desert is intrinsic. So keep that in mind. It is to remember that you're going to the desert for the following reasons: to fast, to live in silence, to pray, so that you might die to yourself quicker, so that Christ might grow in you faster, so that you might give him to the world faster too, this world so hungry for him, to atone for your sins and those of others, to pray for humankind, to pray for peace, to pray for the missionaries and for unity among Christians in the Catholic Church, to become saints faster, lovers of Christ in truth and in deed, to imitate Christ, to save your soul and that of others, to learn total surrender to God. We have made Christ wait long enough. I just love this quote. This was handwritten on the wall of the Hermitage that I moved into in 2003. This is why you go to the desert. It's not because you're an introvert. It's not because you want to do what you want to do when you want to do it. And it's really beautiful the way Jason describes that hermitage as a practice. It's a practice. We talk about ascetical life quite often in Western Christianity with a kind of a negative connotation to it, even though some of those things that Catherine Doherty talks about sound like they're negative things. Actually, I preached on this last night here. The origin of the ascetical life that comes from the ancient Greek tradition is something more akin to an athlete's training. It's not necessarily punitive. It's not necessarily even repentance in the strictest sense of the word. It's a training. It's what you do. It's a practice. It's a practice that you bring, and your life is built around that. So you could say that the monastic life in general is an ascetical life in the sense that our whole life is built around very specific spiritual practices. I've been to Shantivanam, where Father Dorathick is, many times. It's one of the great treasures India has to offer, and the founders of that ashram left us, is they built their life around a whole new set of ascetical practices that were not necessarily the traditional ones of Western Christianity, ascetical practices that were based much more on the genius of India. The yoga tradition, of which Father Dorathick is a fine master and fine teacher, is, for example, that's an ascetical practice. It's ascetical not in the sense of punitive, not in the sense of penitential. It's ascetical in the sense of it's a training. So then to think of solitude as a practice, it's something we do. It's a practice we do in the spiritual life. There's an old saying from the Desert Fathers, and if you're not ready for the cell will spit you out. It's that strong. If you're not ready for the cell will spit you out because it's something you need to be trained for. In this day and age, when we have guys come, for example, to the Hermitage in California, where we now have, Wi-Fi, well, if somebody, coming in at 25 or even 30 years old has never spent time in solitude, and you put them all by themselves in a cell with a refrigerator and a six-pack of Coca-Cola and Wi-Fi, there's no telling what they're going to do with their day. And most people are not trained, in spiritual practice. And that's what the normal Benedictine life is about. I want to clarify one thing that Jason said. We're technically not an order anymore, the Camaldolese. The order is Benedictine. We're a congregation within the Benedictine or within the Greater Benedictine order now. And that was the genius of our founder back in the 9th and 10th, 10th and 11th century, was that he didn't just establish hermitages. He didn't just bless the hermit life. Wherever he would found or reform a monastery, he would put a hermitage next to it. But almost always when he would found a hermitage, he would build a monastery next to it. So this beautiful alteration between community and solitude. And sometimes we thought that the monks, the regular monks who were not hermits, were there to serve the hermits. And there was a time in our tradition when it was kind of like that. But really the way it was laid out is the monastery itself is where the monk gets trained. And I think Father Charles probably benefited from his years of being with the Trappists and his years of formation first, where you get trained. And then even St. Benedict says this at the beginning of his rule, after that training period, then you can face the desert of solitude. So the regular monastic life teaches you the discipline of liturgy, for instance. The liturgy is a very formative tool in scripture, the tradition of the church, and the liturgical cycle of the church. I sometimes say, if you'll excuse the expression, the regular monastic life gives you potty training. It gives you house training, house break. It teaches you how to be with other people. Because if you can't be with other people, you're not going to be able to be alone very well either. We don't get to skip over those relational talents that we need to learn in our life too before we go into solitude. And Benedict is very clear about this. He calls it the cenobium, the monastery for those who are in training. And then those who have really learned how to live the life can face the desert of solitude. Because the desert of solitude was not, again, about being an introvert. It was not about surfing the internet. It was not about doing what you want to do whenever you want to do it. Solitude was about facing the desert, facing that. You've come here to fast. You've come here to be silent. Solitude as a practice. I remember a time when I was living in Santa Cruz, and I'll get to that history a bit, where I was alternating between doing traveling and working interreligious dialogue, and also doing a little bit of teaching in town. And at one point, some friends of mine wanted me to come to a concert that was going on in Santa Cruz in town, which is about half an hour drive away. And I'm sitting in my cabin in the woods thinking, I'd really like to go to this concert, but I'm supposed to stay here in the woods. Just one day was just really clear to me. I can't do too many things like that, or I'm not a hermit monk anymore. Because this life isn't just about me living on my own, doing what I want to do. It's a real practice. There's a little deprivation that goes into that, and certainly some withdrawal that goes into that teaches us something. So back to that beginning, I first ran into Catherine Dweck Doherty and this idea of solitude as a spiritual practice back when I was 18, 19 years old. Later on, going up in my 20s and early 30s, I was a professional musician, not in religious life at the time. And I had a little apartment above a garage, just not too far from downtown Phoenix in Arizona. And I remember my friends would tease me and call me an urban hermit without them necessarily even knowing that I already had this kind of attraction to the solitary life. But I had this beautiful just one big room apartment, would happen to have a baby grand piano in it too at the time. But loving that time of solitude, and perhaps being an introvert in the sense that solitude fed me. There was something about that time of being, don't want to use the word cut off, it sounds too strong, of withdrawal, of retreat. There's a part of withdrawal that really feeds our soul, being cut off from all outer stimuli, and cut off from other conversations. And then in my early 30s, I was looking around again to join religious life, and I tried a few different things. Actually joined seminary for a while in Los Angeles to be a seminarian for the Diocese of Phoenix, where I was living. That didn't work out. And after a year and a half, I left. And one of my professors said to me, go and meet these monks up in Big Sur, California. I don't know if you know California. Big Sur is on the Central Coast. It's about 100 miles where you can't get off the highway. It's one of the most fragile roads in America, Big Sur, Highway 1 from San Luis Obispo to Monterey. And right in the middle of it, in the most fragile part of the entire coast, it keeps falling into the ocean, is this hermitage that's built 1,300 feet up on the side of a mountain overlooking the ocean. And I had never heard of this congregation before. And I remember pulling up, this is in 1991, driving up this 2-mile winding road up the mountain, getting out of the car and just like exhaling for the first time in 15 years. I felt like that, this is it. This is what I was looking for. There's 25 cells, 25 cabins built around 2 common buildings and a church. And it was this beautiful balance of community and solitude. Whereas we had at the time 1, 2, 3, 4 liturgies a day together, always 1 meal a day together. Young guys like myself at the time, we had regular manual work time, we had regular classes. And this wonderful balance of liturgy and solitude, community and solitude. And we had very good teachers at the time too, who were training us in, through the postulancy and through the novitiate about the basics of monastic life. And that's actually when I first met Father Bede Griffiths, who was one of the 3 founders of Shantivanam Ashram there in India. And from the beginning, I met him even before I officially joined the community. I was able to study Eastern spirituality and philosophy while I was studying Western mysticism and the history of monasticism and things like that. So I have had that very strong influence ever since. And one of the reasons that the ashram model, where Father Dorathick is prior right now, and where Father Bede thought this was a very good connection, why they were so attracted to the Camaldolese tradition, is very much like the ashram model, where there is a strong focus on the individual spiritual practice, times of solitude, but also this kind of gentle balance between coming in and out of community at the same time. So again, this appeals back to this idea from the Pustinik of the hermit with his or her door open. People come in and out of that, but the basis of that spiritual life being this practice of solitude. So I had 10 years of life there at Big Sur, really amazing years. Did my formation, finished my seminary studies, ordained a priest after making solemn vows. And partially because of the influence of Father Bede Griffiths, I really had a great longing to immerse myself a little bit more in Asian spirituality. And I was starting to write and play music again. And I had this also, an equal part desire of getting a little more involved in some kind of very specific ministry, which was the practice basically of meditation that so many people, especially lay people, were quite interested in, and so many people who were experimenting with Asian spirituality, which at that point I had been studying pretty deeply for 10 years. So wanting to be both closer to people and wanting to incarnate this Asian spirituality myself. So I wound up leaving New Camaldolese for a full 10 years. The first years being what's called an exclaustration, where I was totally on my own, totally independent. And in the next 7 years, working at the Italians here, actually in Italy, worked out a deal where I could do my work and live my life as a representative of the Camaldolese congregation. It was an amazing experience. I wound up building my life basically around more like a yogic spirituality. I did yoga teacher training, and I was regularly practicing with the community up the mountain from where I lived in this hermitage in the woods, and then got myself involved in various projects of interreligious spirituality, both studying and teaching offering retreats around the world on meditation and doing conferences and concerts and interreligious dialogue activities. But that was, I think I'm always going to look back, however old I live, on that being the most magical period of my life, you know, and found this beautiful balance between, again, between solitude and activity. That time in my own hermitage as really the crucible, the place where I was um, invited to go deeper and deeper and deeper into my own spirituality and meditation practice, but always feeling like from out of that experience, I was ready to burst with creativity. I wound up recording, I think, 10 albums of music during that time. I wound up writing my first books at that time, and now I've written 5 different books. So finding that solitude, that solitary time uh, as yeah, I'm going to use the word crucible again, like a place that allowed this foment of creativity to come out of me as well. Um, Oddly enough, after that, I thought I had ruined my chances for career advancement in the congregation, but instead I was asked to go back to the Hermitage of Big Sur as prior. So I always say I was punished for my success by making me superior. So I went back to Big Sur and served as the prior of our community for 10 and a half years. I was actually back there for 11 years all told, and served as prior for 10 and a half of those years. And that was quite an amazing experience, very difficult, because Dorathick, I'm sure, can sympathize with this. Doing things that I didn't necessarily want to do, you know, I didn't necessarily feel like I was that good at. A lot of administration stuff, working with personnel, building roads, you know, buying property, ushering people back and forth from the hospital in trucks or in helicopters at times. Uh, yeah. But it was one of those experiences that forced me to, I want to say, I think I came out of there with my soul bigger because it forced me to do things that that I didn't necessarily want to do. We think sometimes it's big heroic things that is giving our life to God, you know, being a missionary in foreign lands. In our tradition, we have what's called the charism is called the triplex bonum, the threefold good, because the earliest monks who were following our founder Saint Romuald were regular what we call cenobites, monks who lived in community, hermits, and then a good chunk of the earliest disciples of Saint Romuald were also not just missionaries, but missionary martyrs. And from the very beginning, it was recognized that these guys were going off to be missionaries, but they were going into hostile lands where they quite possibly could be killed for it. And many of them were. So this third good of missionary martyrdom worked its way into our charism from the very beginning: community, solitude, and this third thing. I would call it mainly missionary martyrdom work. And in some way, I think that and one of our monks here in Italy has kind of affirmed me on this, one of the elders here. I think the work in interreligious dialogue nowadays is something like what that third good was about, because they were sent out, and it was called, in a very politically incorrect term, the evangelorum paganorum, the evangelization of pagans. It was really seen that they were being sent not just for missionary work, but for really dangerous lands, places where nobody else would want to go, kind of the soft spots. And our former Prior General Alessandro Barban also said that about Father Bede Griffiths in his whole adventure in Italy, the last part of his life, going way outside of his comfort zone to spread the gospel in a whole new way by incarnating, you know, in the jungles of South India. All that to say, sometimes we can think of this third good, you know, this missionary martyrdom is going off to foreign land somewhere, but sometimes the third good could actually be serving 10 and a half years as prior, because it's not about one thing specific. The end of this whole path, from my experience, is being absolutely available to the Spirit of God. That's the end of it. And I sometimes joke about that. And that could be that you're going to be asked to be a recluse. That could be that you're asked to be a foreign missionary. It could be that you're asked to be prior for 10 and a half or 12 years. It could be that you're, called to be a chaiwala in the streets of Delhi, or, serving chestnuts in the plaza in front of the Pantheon. The whole point of this life is to be absolutely available to the Spirit of God, to go and do what God wants you to do, what God needs you to do. I've probably come up to my time here. I'll give you the last part of this. My own story brings me to now. And I was telling somebody the other day, forgive me for talking about myself so much, but the only thing I have to really offer is my experience. And that's very much in the desert monastic tradition. We don't talk about theory. This is how I've lived. This is what I've learned from how I've lived. When the period of my priorship was over in January 2024, the hope was I would be able to go back somehow to the life I had been living for those 10 years, both the work in interreligious dialogue, but myself wanting to immerse myself yet again in that other spirituality of more influenced by the Asian tradition. I took a sabbatical year, which kind of was reincarnating that earlier period where I accepted some work around the world, but also some great times of solitude and deepening in my own, especially back to the yoga practice. Actually, my first stop was with Dorathick in India. I had a great couple of weeks there with him. And in the middle of that, I was giving a retreat at St. John's Abbey in Collegeville, Minnesota, and was approached by my predecessor in this job that I'm in right now, who asked me if I would be the Secretary General of Monastic Interreligious Dialogue. And I had actually forgotten all about the organization, even though I had worked for them before. We have branches all over the world of monks and nuns, both Trappists and Benedictines, who are engaged and involved in dialogue, mainly with Buddhism and Hinduism, but more and more, especially with Islam. I've been expanding that out a little bit more yet. And it didn't take me very long to discern that was the next step. That was what I was supposed to do next. To my friends, it seemed like it was the absolute obvious thing to do, but also like every door opened up with that. My own prior said yes, the abbot primate of the Benedictines said yes, our prior general said yes. So I accepted this position and I moved to Rome in September of 2024. And this is Dorathick lived here and studied here too. This is a big old house we live in. We're like 9 semi-stable here. Students come and go and guests come and go in the middle of the historical center of Rome. The interesting thing about this life for me here, and actually I'm called to travel quite a bit now around the world, meeting our commissions in different places in the world. When I'm home, the interesting thing about this life is, first of all, that we're in the middle of the city, or in the middle of Rome. Secondly, it's the first time I've actually lived in a regular kind of monastery, where I have next door neighbors, I have somebody in the room next to me and on either side, which I find, I don't know, you want to use the word, something warm and cozy about that. The first time having lived with neighbors in my monastic life. But the third thing is that because there's not a heavy schedule here, because of it being a student house, I still spend most of the day by myself in my room. I'm living in, I think, in the smallest room I've ever lived in as well, and as happy as could be. We have, I get up very early and do my morning meditations, and we have, morning prayer and breakfast together. And then I'm by myself the entire morning. We have lunch together, midday prayer, and then I'm by myself the entire afternoon again. We have evening prayer and mass, and then I usually don't go to dinner with the brothers, so I have the evening to myself again. I'm kind of got back to that same Camaldolese pattern, even living here in the middle of the city, and it's serving me quite well. I want to say, luckily, our internet isn't that good here, so I'm not actually tempted to spend too much time online, though a lot of my work is online. Actually, I'm downstairs now in this big salon where the internet is strong because it's 4 o'clock in the morning here also. I want to talk in my room. How do I want to wrap that up? I guess what I want to emphasize is, first of all, this idea of solitude as a practice, not as a concession to our personality, and certainly not as a way of avoiding community, not as a way of avoiding liturgy, not as a way of avoiding human growth and relationship. Because if you're not ready for the cell will spit you out. We'll find along the way that solitude, the solitary life, can actually be deforming if you're not ready for it. I wanted to end with this one last quote. This is from a writer who I really admire named David Brooks. He's a conservative columnist. Well, he used to be for the New York Times. He's just stepped down from the New York Times, but also an author. And I got this from him, I think back in 2019. He had gone through a big change in his life. And he says this: go out into the wilderness alone. You go out to the place where there's nobody to perform, and the ego has nothing to do, and it crumbles. That's the real job of solitude. Maybe Dorathick will say something about Ramana Maharshi. This is one of those central things there. You go somewhere where that ego is going to just crumble. And only then, this is amazing how he says this last line, are you capable of being loved? Not only capable of loving, but only then are you capable of being loved. It's that kind of experience that really turns us into human beings when all those defenses get down. You go out into the wilderness alone. You go out to the place where there's nobody there to perform, and the ego has nothing to do, and it crumbles. In solitude, there's nobody there to perform the Cyprian show for. I'm just there with me, and the ego has nothing to do, and it crumbles. And only then are we capable of being loved, of being known. And once we're loved and known, then we can also know and love as well. I think that's enough for me. I'll turn that over to Dorathick.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Go ahead, Dorathick.
Hello to all, and thank you, Cyprian, for your beautiful presentation, as well as Jason, and to all the members here. Warm greetings from India. As when I hear this title again, as beautifully again, Jason gave an introduction of Charles Brandt, how he really lived and all that. It comes to me a beautiful image, especially in the Andaman Island in India, where you find in the coast very often a type of a shell, which is hermit shell or hermit crab, we call it. That very nature of this hermit crab, it doesn't have a shell actually. It normally takes some other shell and it carries a while for it to live around. In a way, if I honestly say that, well, I personally also entered in that way, that trying to abide some place where we should try some much more spiritual practices. Though, like when I entered in age of 23, I was really practicing yoga, as well as I really wanted to practice more, as we thought that's the spiritual heights we should reach out. And that's a way that I thought it fascinated me to enter a place where we could really protect you, and really it makes to grow much more deeper to myself. And in that way, I was looking that a place supposed to be very ideal to me as a practitioner of yoga, as well as to the Indian spirit, as well as also the born and brought up with the Catholic faith. where a shell I should fix it. I'm looking for the shell, and at last I thought of ending up Carthusians, thinking that's the best way, that much more severe and austere to be, the heights of the spiritual practices could be. Secondly, unfortunately, they could not find Carthusians in India. The second option came to me was Cistercian, which was slightly stricter than any other Benedictines to talk. But luckily, I did not also end up there. So the third way, I just found not Shantivanam, but one of the disciples of Father Bede and Francis Acharya, who lived in Kerala, had a hermitage. And it was ideal because, in a way, that it was so distant from the world. It's a real hermitage. Nobody was there except this old man. He was 82 at that time. I was just 23. Entering there, like, it's totally new in a way that also it's an Eastern, under the Eastern tradition, which was totally a different rite and the different liturgy. Everything was totally new to me. But one thing I really loved was the solitude, as Father Cyprian was constantly emphasizing in his talk, that which really admired. I don't know, somehow in my little childhood, I had this also, as Father Cyprian also had that beautifully. Uh, just enjoy in solitude, particularly in the nature. I can really sit hours and hours. When a day, whole day, if you leave me with the nature, I can just be there, satisfied with myself. And that really helped made me also to this place particularly, which is in the mountains, as probably as the New Camaldolese, so beautiful with the nature. I was really moved with this very much. And for a while, it took me that I was very happy that in a while that when I was in 23, I was quite self-sufficient to live in all my life. I was extremely, I loved the luxury way of life. But the moment I took up this way to cut short all that, probably two pairs of dress I took all the while myself to enter this hermitage. And few books I had, only possessions I had. And in a way that I was believing myself, also trying to advance my spiritual practices. Well, I did like 3 hours to 5 hours, sometimes 6 hours of meditation. But the long run, something I have been noticing that I always have a kind of a where we think of a self-emptying, but rather somehow also a spiritual ego in me which grew up gradually in the solitude, in the silence, in the hermitage. I just went to the hermitage really to get rid of all that and to being really rooted in my spiritual growth. But also, I also learned something that in the long run, that like it took me 7 or 8 years in the hermitage. I said that I left everything, but to denounce that, to say that I left everything. And that's really that I could not live. And that really, in a way, that's a big challenge in the hermetical life as well as a solitude life too. Whereas again, where a spiritual ego, we nourishes, we nourishes, we nourishes. And that really, it also at one point, also Father Cyprian really pointed out, it's not an isolation or exclusion that which we get rid of things and knowing myself, but unfortunately, unfortunately, that even the spiritual way of life, we could get into that. And I think to get rid that, what which makes again, Father Cyprian again pointed out, a discipline. Well, again, the monastic tradition always insisted on the discipline. You know, in again Shantivanam, or we in India, we call monasticism or hermit as an ashram, a very word, ashramam. Shramam comes from shrama, which means an effort. In a general term, especially if you suffix in front of anything, it becomes something negative. So when you fix shrama means in a way that there is no effort. But ultimately, I would say that an effortless effort it's supposed to be. It gives a very beautiful term that in Tamil, the very word discipline comes from olukam, which means it comes from olugudal, that is to flow. And discipline is not something we learn, it is not something we impose. It has to come with a natural aligning process. I think that's really a core of Hermitage. And that's what I believe, that the spiritual practices makes us every discipline, whether it is a punctual in prayer, a punctual in a food, or punctual in every manual works which I do. It brings back a kind of inner harmony within me, and that's natural. So the discipline for me personally is not that which somebody can tell you or guide you in a way that, but it is a natural flow. It happens to you. That is, you're aligned with all nature, with all God, with all your fellow beings, and that alignment supposed to happen in the hermitage. So again, a very word again to the hermit, again to the etymologically, if you go back again to the deserted, to withdraw, all that comes again so beautifully. It's not again isolation today as some context we may think of. It is something separation, but it is that which leave from the world to be in the world. And that's what again all the great sages discovered this, like Ramana Maharshi, even in his 14th, 15, he left the whole world, but then he realized in this journey, the inner journey, where this discipline really made him to flow, to be in the world. I think also this Father Charles, who really also discovered that, and also so beautifully as Jason was pointed out, how much he's really being in that place. And that's what again in the rule of Saint Benedict or Saint Benedictine tradition always emphasized, that the stability on that. And the stability in the Benedictine tradition is of also always a conversion of life, not really a place itself. Again, the conversion of life is really happen in the real hermitage. The hermitage, again, one single phrase I was really fascinated of Camaldolese spirituality was the single little tiny rule, the very first phrase of St. Romuald: sit in a cell as a paradise. And it is a very, very profound statement for me personally when I look at from this Indian perspective, whereas the rishis really had this experience, and where they lived in a cell as a paradise means in paradise there is nothing absent. It's a fullness. It's not that which lacks something. But today sometimes we may think in other way, that living in a cell means we are really lacking something. We are really lacking something. It is not that way. As a paradise experience, there is nothing in lack. So that experience is moving to the fullness as the beautiful inspiration for me, again, the Isha Upanishad. The fullness, everything comes, and the fullness it will return. And I think exactly I see in Saint Romuald's vision of again the solitude, the beauty of solitude, whereas it returned to that the very center of fullness, as again for the Bede or Moshna or Abhishektananda rightly points out, and the importance of the cave of heart as a hermit for them, where you return to that, the very interiority, and recognizing the subtlety of your ego. And I would say that it's more than a kind of a self-denial. I would say there we come to an understanding, a self-acceptance. And that's the biggest part which the hermetical journey comes as. That's a spiritual practice. Now, all our prayers, our penance, all that lead to that self-acceptance. The more we get the self-acceptance, as again Cyprian pointed out, we stop looking for self-recognition. And this is very psychological aspect too, where a very core which cut down all our spiritual practices. And the self-acceptance, once you had, there really we accept everything around us. And the moment we start accepting around us all that what happens, and there is this beginning of accepting the presence of God everywhere. And that's what Abhishektananda so beautifully pointed, that we should be present in the presence. That's a beautiful aspect, that where the hermetic life or the spiritual practices always give us a challenge to believe in the future or abiding in the present, or abiding in the past. And I would say that here, one of the core practices which we have to be, again, it's a repetition with Father Cyprian, again, he's put solitude, I would say silence, as a pure awareness. It's not an awareness you cultivate, but it's a pure awareness already there. It's you're getting part in that awareness. Don't mistaken I to be aware. It's rather than like you're participating in that awareness. So that's a different aspect, that it's more not only the subjective, it's not an objective, but it is more realistic to be in that presence. So in that silence is not an emptiness, but it is an undivided attention. It's an undivided attention. It's what, again, we need today in this world, whereas where we caught up a kind of a duality, which like the modern world could really can be so obsessed with, is the difference between God, world, spirit, matter, human nature. I think there is no division, honestly, that we live in the whole reality. Whereas when I said that this self-acceptance is not coming into ourselves, we really started that, because that's what psychologically we project even spirituality sometimes, with this nature, with God, with the matter, with the human, with again the whole one's own self. And there again, we need a healing today. This divisions of illusion is literally caused by fear. Again, in the solitude, one of the greatest fear that every monastics or rishis even had a problem in the solitude, before experiencing God, before experiencing oneself, they always had a fight with the temptations. And I would say that even 40 days of fast, praying, I love that Jesus fasted 40 days, day and night, prayed. The first thing he encountered was not God, but the temptation. And that's a very, very a strong thing, that the moment we try to go to any hermetical life or a solitude life, the primary struggle we come across is a temptation. It doesn't mean that sometimes a temptation for me even to grow more spiritually. It's a temptation. It's a temptation to grow more spiritually, that what I gain. I think it's much, that today's gospel is very apt. I really love that even when I reflect with this today's our conversation. When the disciples of Jesus went, the disciples of John went to Jesus and asked, why do we fast and the Pharisees fast, your disciples don't fast? So I would say that here again, they thought the fasting is something, a kind of a real abstinence, that we get something benefit from that. Similarly, as I would say that the hermetical life, always a temptation, which we think, or I think, I will benefit something much more than others. I think this is a very, very strong temptation, which really crawl down our ego in something very much in a very nasty way, but very subtle, very unconscious in our own spiritual practices. So I would say there is an explicit sign. We should also be able to screen this spiritual ego when we are in hermitage. And that's a very mirroring. Every day we should mirror that spiritual ego which we are constructing, and where we could also come across where this inner dualism has to heal with the two aspects. I would say that one is outer ecology can be restored very easily. So the more we go within, it is also explicit the more which we have to go out. And this both is very important. That doesn't mean that a physical presence, you should go out to the whole world, but it is something very much within self. And that's what, like, sometimes I say this example, a great Muni, a sage who went to the forest, recluded with everything, and he was living in the forest in a cave for 45 years. Now, the problem is he cannot come out from the forest. He cannot come out from the cave. Though he detached from the whole world, but he got attached to the cave and the forest. And this also happened in the hermetical journey, whereas even to the institutional formation, the hermetical formation, where we could also have a subtlety to cling in some forms and some structure. And again, I would say that that could be also a kind of a crab which is looking for the hermitage to abide in it. So this is the subtlety and also a danger in the spiritual practices which we practice. So at last, I would say that this mirroring will also make you to go outward. The more we are go inward, the more we go outward, the joy. And this is the key. This is the key, that where you are a joyful person in all your spiritual practices. And anytime this joy is not taken, as again Cyprian beautifully says that, even when you're commanded that something is not really your taste, it's not your cup of tea, but yet I should be able to take part that joyfully, then I could say that this hermit, that the being, you are in the whole of the whole, you don't lack anything. The moment I deny that this is not my practice, then I should say something much more we lack. As I said earlier, I was looking for, I can't accept my own self. I can't accept my own self. And, it's a beautiful, again, recently we celebrated this feast of St. Scholastica. And one of the point I really love that St. Benedict in his rule, he always proposes a term to listen. And this is also in the Indian term very important, listening to one's own self. The highest form of knowledge in the Indian tradition, we acquire is a self-knowledge. And this self-knowledge, as St. Benedict would say that, listen to the ear of the heart. And that's what also the idea of the spiritual practices in Hermitage, where you listen to the heart. Though he composed a so beautiful rule, which is very moderate, which is really deeper to get into this spiritual practices, yet he failed to listen to her own sister. Yet he failed. It failed. The whole structure is meant to listen, but she could not able to listen to her own plea, a simple human plea, a simple human fragile plea. But he denied that. And then she beautifully quotes, we do not know much about her or her life, but the very beautiful statement, it states that, I asked you, you don't listen, but then I asked God, he listened. I think it's so beautiful. Lately, St. Benedict really humbled himself to listen that reality. So it's a hard part, though, when you come across a certain spiritual practices for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, still we could be a subtlety of attachment to that spiritual practices. And I would say, cut short that, it's very essential. In the Bhagavad Gita, so beautifully says that it talks about a tree which Ashwatthata, a tree of life, and sometimes we should cut down the tree. The tool which he uses is a detachment. Detachment is the only the instrument which cuts short that which not gives life to you. And I would say that the spiritual practice, again, the hermetic life is that which makes to cut short. So for me, again, detachment, I see that it's an all-embracing. It's a self-acceptance, and there we really bloom with all-embracing. So, I mean, for me, again, this Shantivanam really made and helpful where that to see that again, this spiritual practices which we have and which we come across, it's a very open to everybody. People come sort of all sort of people, not only Christians, Hindus, different monastic traditions, different spirituality. They pop up here, and I would have a very, very challenging every day to listen to them what really they are. And for me, again, I learned that the moment I fully open and listen to anyone, even a horrible person in the society, I learned something that God has given an opportunity me and to him to relate, and me and to him to be contribute to the universe. Even in that way, again, that's what the dialogue blooms. And the dialogue is nothing, again, I would say a total self-giving. A true dialogue emerge the moment we are able to giving ourselves totally and available for others. And somehow I would say that, so even in the Hermitage, it is not about I, how much I reached my spiritual heights. It is the more how much I see the spiritual heights of others. And there we become a participation. And that's what, again, the whole idea of Satchit Ananda, the whole ashram, our ashram is really named on that. And that the being, the true being, the truth, which is a being in everything, and awareness. Am I aware in that presence of being, or am I present to that being? And there at the last, Ananda. And Ananda, as I said, one of the very, very today's an ecological virtue we need to be cultivate, because as I said, the more we journey towards within, and that without coming out, there the ecosystem is totally there. And I would say that there's a slight measuring thing which I could say give to you, that every breath you breathe is not for you, it's for this ecosystem. So it's also a complementary, a life complementary that which we give. And that participation when only really happens in the deeper of this hermetical life. And this hermetical life, as I want to say, that it is not that we look for shells of hermits to live, where I could able to practice my spirituality, where I could able to my way of doing things, but it is rather the other way, where a place which makes to total transformation, a total burning out yourself. And there we become a light to this world. I would say that today our spiritual practices, a monastic life or a hermetical life should be that the light where we are. And I'm sure that we all have that tiny lights in different parts of the world. And I would say that we should really cherish out and also remind that also be aware of the subtlety of the danger in this our own practices. And I thank you for this wonderful opportunity and sharing with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you both so very much for your insights and your life experience that you've brought to this conversation. And yeah, I definitely appreciate some of the great phrasing, the way that you frame this as the absolute availability to the Spirit of God, right? Or just this notion of attention, the caution around solitude as being potentially deforming. And I love Dorathick, the emphasis on Ananda, on this deep sense of joy and interconnection. And actually, you mentioned something related to ecology. And I recently read a novel by Barbara Kingsolver called The Prodigal Summer. And it's this really beautifully interwoven three stories. And one of the stories is a woman who lives in a cabin in Appalachia as a kind of an ecological field worker. And she says, solitude is a human presumption, right? This idea that humans could be alone even for a moment in a world of deep ecological interconnection is a beautiful notion. And so I wonder if maybe we could move a little deeper into the ecological question of what the benefits of solitude in relation to land, to place, to ecology, and then we can open it up to some questions from the folks here.
Yeah, we lost Dorathick. I'm not sure. I can
He
say
might,
a little
yeah,
something about that.
he's here, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, there. Um,
Sorry.
there was a great, the poetry and writing of David White, who's from
Yeah.
your area, actually. I remember him telling this story about a friend of his that he went to visit and I believe it was in Ireland, who lived on a farm. And the line from his poem about this was, I finally found the place where I could die. Like, this is where I want to spend the rest of my life. This is where I want to be. And it always reminds me that there's a beautiful book by the late Trappist abbot Francis Klein called Lovers of the Place. And it's his translation of this phrase that comes from the description of the early people of the Cistercian reform. They lived in this area in France that was like a swamp, like nobody else wanted to live in it, but they were lovers of that place. And there's something about the monk being the lover of the place, just becoming so much a part of the land. And those two things put together, I finally found the place where I could die, and being a lover of the place, that experience I keep going back to that I had in Santa Cruz, that little cabin. I, that line rang so true for me. Like, this is where I want to spend the rest of my life. I want to sink into this land, to become like almost like a seed that falls on the ground and died. Now, of course, I was asked to leave it at some point. But I think this relation to the land, as probably Father Charles would have been able to attest to, that we actually become part of the ecosystem around, that he could name, all the trees, that he could name the birds, he could name the plants that were around him. I remember there's one line I wanted to bring up in another context, but I'll put it in this context. The reading that we use on the Feast of Saint Scholastica is actually one of those readings that's very dear to the heart of contemplatives. In the second chapter of the book of the prophet Hosea, and God says, I will lead her into the desert, and there I will speak to her heart. Now, to me, that putting those two things together is beautiful. It's both the desert, which is a place of purification, and it's a bridal chamber. I'll go to the desert, and there I will speak to her heart. The other reason I wanted to bring that up was I did a solitude retreat in Snowmass, Colorado. At the time, that monastery was just closed down, St. Benedict's Trappist Abbey. Sadly, I love that place and I love that community. But they had a hermitage about 4 miles from the monastery, 9,000 feet up in the Rockies. It was the best retreat I ever had. They let me use this beautiful hermitage for I think I was there 10 days or so. And at the end of the time, I was reflecting on this scripture passage. I had taken that with me. I will lead her into the desert and speak to her heart. And the last day, I woke up like at 1:30 in the morning, which is kind of a bewitching hour for me quite often anyway, with the desire to write a song, being a songwriter. And the only thing I had in my mind was this scripture passage. And so I spent like the next 3 hours or so from 1:30 to 4 in the morning writing this song. And I tell this story kind of making fun of myself. At the end of this pretty good lyric, I wound up being really disappointed with the song because I didn't say anything about God. I was using this as the refrain. I will lead you into the desert and tenderly speak to your heart. And the final thing is, I'm asking the question, what did you go out the desert to see? What did you go to the desert to see? And in the last verse, I answer the question and I say, I saw mountains in summer still covered with snow. I heard coyote howl for no reason I know. A thunderstorm passed at my level of sight. Dawn slipped in early through a crack in the night. A bee seemed to buzz flying straight through my head. A bird sang vespers for me. At first I was disappointed. I didn't say anything about God and the Spirit and Holy Communion and then the second thought, I thought what happened during that beautiful time of solitude was I actually noticed everything that was around me. I saw everything. I saw mountains in summer still covered with snow. I heard the coyote howling. I saw dawn crack through the black of night, from 9,000 feet up in the Rockies. I really experienced this bee, flying so close to me that it seemed like it was going right by. I heard the bird singing for the first time. So there's something about that experience of letting the external stimulation also fall away, where I think this is a phrase of William McNamara, we actually start to see the really real. The filters drop off and we see, God willing, not only nature around us, but we actually interact with other people in that way too, where some of the filters come down and we can have a really direct encounter. Dorathick, what do you think about this? I think you have you have a closer relationship to the earth than I do. I think
Yeah.
I've seen you work those gardens.
I think that nobody can be away from this earth.
Mm,
Well, we all live in the earth, but and I would say that only we are not consciously aware that how much we are present in this earth. Like I
mm,
think without everything, what we are is that earth. I remember that sometimes back there was a little girl was asking me about the creation story. You know, the science teaches us we are coming from evolution, and the church teaches to that we are made out of dust. Then I told her that it looks like a very stupid thing, God creating out of dust. But if you look back, your own human body consists of all minerals which is found in this soil.
mm,
So I think that we are not apart from the universe at all. We are in
mm,
the universe and we are universe. One
mm,
of the greatest sages, Agastya Muni from a Tamil tradition, he says that today we talk about the microcosmos and macrocosmos. He talked 3,000 years back. Whatever you find in this world, it is in you. And I would
mm,
say all these minerals, all the stuffs which is present in the soil. And now I say that taking care of your own self, taking care of the ecology, the ecosystem, it's not that you go out and take care of planting some trees, plants. It's one of the ways to caring the ecosystem. I think taking care of one's own self, taking care of one's own neighbor, one's own family, one's own community, it is caring the ecosystem.
mm,
So more than I think the other way, like planting trees, making green, it's one of the ways to prevent, protect, care the ecosystems. But not all that is a caring the ecosystem.
mm,
So if you look back again, the ecosystem, we say the survival of the fittest, we say one of the ways that. But I think it's not the way we have to understand it is not the survival of the fittest, I would say, acceptance of the fittest.
mm,
Sometimes, yes, we need certainly for not your survival, but it is also like, let's say, I eat a meat uh, because it's a need for me for survival in one extent, but the other extent I fulfill my duty to the cosmos because that I took that. It's not I
mm,
satisfy with my pleasures eating with that. I took because I need an energy to transform this energy in a certain manner. So I took that. So that, it's like, again, it's not a dominion over the nature. I would say it's a stewardship to the nature. It's a participation with the nature. And it's also a self-giving with the nature.
mm,
To sustain my life, somebody have given myself their self. It could be an animals or plants or whatever it could be. We think it's a low being and we are high being. But I think it's not. Essentially, we are being. There is no criteria whether we are higher or lower. In our intellect, our reason, we thought we are highest, but not necessarily. I think even the very soil itself, I would say, like, let's say, it has a very higher intelligence. Let's say you put a seed in the soil, it started to germinating. And if you put some other stuff, it really rotten and it get into the soil. And who decide that? And the intelligence behind that. and that earth sustain the whole. So there is a higher intelligence also in nature. It works through the nature, and only when it works, when I'm denying that or I'm allowing it to participate. So in that way, I think we really don't become distant from the ecology or ecosystem which we talk about. We can't literally do, but really we have a chance. As I said, every breath, it's a participation.
Mm,
Every breath, you are maintaining the ecosystem.
mm,
That's what our life is. So consciously make an awareness. We can never escape from this reality of the eco balance or eco nourishment. And that's sort of one thing I said. All this creation is a reflection. And I would say that's Anandamaya. That's one of the sheets in the Indian system. We say Anandamaya Kosham. That's the sheets which we go inner where a layer you open up. Anandamaya Kosham is that your mind is participating with that blissfulness, so that
mm,
every creation become a sensible. And I think it's beautiful again in the Genesis. After all the creation, God sees everything what he made is good, and he called the human being to name it. It's so nice.
mm,
He named it. And it is said that what he named, it became the name. So it's also a kind of a psychological way that whatever we make a judgment, it becomes judged. So the creation, as I said, that as we also to understand the mystery of creation, there we really need a contemplation. There we need a silence to break the judgments we created of this creation. So always we had a tendency, this is good, this is bad, this is not right, this is not functioning in me. There is a higher intelligence where the Indian tradition always proposed that a Mahabuddhi, the higher intelligence, which is allowing divine to work in you and to see that all that he has created is good.
mm,
And I think that's a real participation of the ecosystem or ecology, whatever we see. Thank
mm.
you.
Hmm.
And also this phrasing that Father Bede, two things he
Yeah,
said that really struck me. One was that to realize that we're a part of nature. We're not separate
true,
from nature. We're actually part of
true,
the ecosystem,
true,
which,
true.
from the Cartesian mentality onward, we thought of ourselves as separate from and looking down on. And then
Yeah,
the other thing, like in the more spiritual view of it, this is a line from Bede again. We are nature coming into consciousness.
yeah, that's
From
true.
really, I'm kind of one of those panpsychists, believing everything's permeated somehow by
Yeah,
consciousness. But in us, it's that conscious um,
yeah,
self-consciousness, knowing that we know that we know that we know that we know. So we're part of that nature coming into
yeah,
consciousness. And all create,
beautiful.
St. Paul says, all creation is groaning in agony while we work this out. Somehow that's our job for creation as well.
Yeah,
So definitely one of the benefits then of solitude as a spiritual practice is, as both of you pointed out, right, is this gift of attention, of time, of spaciousness, right? And so, and I think that's for, that we've had several people since the Hermitage in Black Creek has become, part of the Hermitage Society. We've had several people stay there, and I've had the privilege of staying there, and there absolutely is a kind of personhood to the place that you show up and you're alone, but you're not alone. And the pace of the season and the day starts to sort of shape you, inform you. And I think that that's one of the powerful things about monasteries. They're sanctuaries.
Yeah.
Not everyone is called to the monastic life or to the hermit life. I thought I was maybe, but then decided not to. I went in the direction of education. But I remember the moment I got out of my car at New Camaldolese Hermitage, had that similar experience to you, maybe, Cyprian, that there was just this moment of breath and openness and
Mm,
quietude. And that's, I think, the opportunity of solitude, even if you do take it in your room in the middle of Rome, you know. I think that's actually a really powerful example to the folks with us tonight, that Hermitage, you don't have to necessarily come and be a contemplative in residence at
Yeah.
Charles Brandt Hermitage. You can do this from your apartment or from your home.
Do you know, I was actually thinking of this a little while ago too, while we were talking. One of my first experiences with a person who really called herself a hermit was with a Franciscan sister who lived as a hermit in uptown Chicago, in one of the
Hmm.
roughest parts of town, actually.
Hmm.
And she wound up actually being murdered by a homeless guy. But
Oh
that
no.
stuck so much in my mind, even from, again, from 18 years old. I love this idea of an urban hermit, and I've for a
Yeah.
long time, had the idea that maybe I would end up that way myself, a little tiny apartment somewhere, yeah,
Yeah.
in the middle of the busy
Well, let's
city.
let's open it up a bit and to see if anyone else would like to share. Feel free to raise your hand, and we can unmute you. You can also type your question in the chat if you'd like to do it that way. But anything you'd like to share, or even a reflection from Charles that either of these two presentations brought up for you, if you are have a connection. We have some real Hermitage Society veterans in the call and several board members. Anne is with us, Sophia from the board, Bruce Witzel and George Wall, who founded the Hermitage Society, are here as well. And Willa Cannon, who is the heart and soul of the Hermitage Society, who nursed Charles as he was in hospice before he died. And so, there's some real wisdom in this room as well, and some deep connection to Father Charles and to solitude. So don't be shy if anyone has a question that they'd like to pose. I can see Emily there is in the Hermitage now. Hi, Emily. That's great. All right. Well, I'll let the questions percolate. Just again, if you would like to ask a question, raise your hand. But in the meantime, I have a question. I remember the first time I met Father Cyprian, we were actually in Bellingham, Washington, talking about the monastic life and my research. And I asked him this question about monasticism as being, the asceticism of monasticism. And when I read some of the early church fathers, sometimes they sound quite dualistic, and that the hermit life is a vehicle to get the soul out of the body and out of the
Yeah,
world, right? The fuga mundi, as we talked about.
yeah,
In a sense, it was like a first axial technology, right? We wanted to separate
yeah.
the soul from the body, but I definitely get a sense that contemporary monasticism and certainly the benefit of solitude these days is much more world affirming. So maybe could you say anything about the asceticism? You kind of did. You did cover this, but anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, actually, I've been on this theme quite a bit. We had the 75th anniversary at Shantivanam, and I spoke about this a little too. The two people I keep coming back to again, Bede Griffiths, and the other one is William Johnston in his writings. I believe this is from his book, Mystical Theology. One of the issues that comes up quite often in these times is how quickly Christianity adopted Greek philosophy as a vehicle to convey its charisma, convey its beliefs. And there's a kind of a dualism, intrinsic in Greek philosophy. Just to make it very simple, Plato's pun, sema soma, that the body is a tomb for the soul. And so it seems that the whole point of the spiritual life is for us to kill the body so that the soul can be free. We picked that up, as an old philosophy teacher used to say, you need to eat the fish and spit out the bones. We didn't always spit out the bones of that. But it's not just in Greek philosophy. It's certainly not just in Christianity. I've seen this in Buddhism. I've seen this in Hinduism. I've seen this in so many spiritual traditions. This easy entree to think the body's bad, the soul is good. So beat the body so the soul can be free. And we would call that dualism. The body's bad, the soul is good, or the mind is good and matter is bad. And the weird thing about that, of course, is that for a Christian, our whole belief system starts out with the word made flesh. You know, it's kind of a contradiction to Greek thought that we believe that God was made mud and blood uh, and matter, and we lose that pretty early on. So when the ascetical tradition picks up in Western Christianity, that's why I keep saying asceticism comes in a punitive way. Asceticism becomes killing the body and removing yourself from the earth. And as you mentioned, it's that first axial consciousness of moving toward the sky and away from the earth, moving toward the father and away from the mother, moving toward rationality and away from even intuition, which is also move away from feminine to the masculine. And if we are in a new age of a second axial consciousness, which folks like our Father Bruno or Ken Wilber or Houston Smith or folks like that, Ewart Cousins would say, it's recovering what we left behind in the axial age, not doing away with any of the evolution we've had in terms of rationality and higher forms of consciousness, but recovering, I would say, three things: the feminine, the earth, and the body. I put that together with this discovery of Westerners, of Eastern, of Asian Christian, of Asian ascetical practices, being
Mhm.
things like, certainly like meditation itself, which people forget is actually kind of a yogic practice. I mean, one of the, Father Bede said, you know, in India, the first thing you get taught to do is how to sit, you know, you're really in your body. But for me, it was just the brilliance of the yoga tradition that it really does go from the gross to the subtle. You go from your bones and your muscles and your sinews to your breath to the mind. There's that pathway through. But even though quite often the yogic philosophy itself at the end wants to leave the body behind, um, I think what Christianity brings to that is that the body's meant for glory. You know, the body's meant
Mhm.
for rising from the dead and ascending to the right hand of the Father in glory, which maybe Dora can speak about this too, is one of the bridges that Father Bede had, not only with the yogic tradition, but with the philosophy of Sri Aurobindo, who talked about integral yoga, which passes into the West, into Ken Wilber's idea of integral spirituality. And I tell you what, this is a topic that comes up for me over and over and over again. I'll never tire of it. My second book was called Spirit, Soul, and Body. It was all about an exploration of this. What does it look like for a Christian to have an integral spirituality? And maybe that's our modern mindset. If I start talking about this, I'll never shut up. So see if Dorathick has something to
You wrote
say
a
about
book
this.
on it, right? That's one of
I
your
read a
books.
book,
Yeah.
and that was
Yeah.
only, I had to leave 100 pages out. It was too long. I
Yeah.
have so much to say about this.
All right. The
Dorathick, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with that. How what you said again as your book again. I think last time also you pointed something when we were here in Santivaram too. Similarly, that
Yeah,
it's something the vessel you consider or something the word which you used. I think that the very word also one of the sages Tirumular who uses this term very beautifully. Again, 3,000 years back, he uses that. Your body is a kind of a vessel which carries your soul, a sacred,
mm,
a sacred vessel which carries your soul, which was really a term which used of Tirumantaram. And it's one of the beautiful book as well as the sage, the journey of himself itself, because the first part of his life, he always thought the body has to live eternally.
mm,
The second part of his life, he thought the soul has to become more eternally. At
mm,
last, he says, come to a point that the whole is integrated and all being is eternal.
uh,
It's so nice again. I think
Mhm.
that's what we miss it, especially. Sometimes the East is very much focused on the inside, uh,
yeah,
and the West is too much focused on outside. And in a way that, as well as again, that was the dream of Father Bede, where this bridge has to happen, and
yeah,
both has to. I think it's both are important. I, there is a nice saying that for I don't know somewhere I saw that listen to your heart, but take your mind to. You know,
Yeah.
it's both important. So it's somewhere we live a kind of a world that which we are quite disintegrated of our own being. I
Mm.
think also the monastic practices or the hermitical life, which really brings back that integration, as for the Cyprian was pointed out. And I think the fragmented world which we live is that a disintegration. That
Mm.
disintegration longs for identity. That disintegration longs for acceptance, and that disintegration really creates a fear of exclusion. And
Mm.
that exclusion we really deny things, and which
Mm.
we have its own. That's what the body, which I don't participate well, I don't value my body well. The
Yeah.
mind, which I don't participate well, I don't value my mind well. The
Mm.
value which I don't give to my soul, I don't really have a sense. So that's where we ourselves conflict our own self. Our thoughts, our actions contradicts because we don't really accept those things. I think that
Well,
integration is very important.
yeah, we have a question. Well, this is
Yes.
great. Let's open it up. Thank you so much, both of you, for responding to that. Robert, go ahead. Robert McDonald.
Yeah, my question is for Dorathick. Um, 7 years ago, I actually visited Shantivanam with Russell Paul for a month or for 3 weeks. And I guess it's more of an observation, and you've touched on it today, that by mixing the traditions, by combining the traditions, trying to draw wisdom from all of the traditions, uh, if you hold any one too tightly, you end up with a mental contradiction. What I saw at Shantivanam was the Benedictine tradition being honored, the Indian traditions. I remember the Arati ceremonies at the end of the masses. There was an integration of all these things, and I found that very beautiful. It's holding on to the ideas, the concepts that gets us into trouble, I think. And somehow I saw a demonstration of at Shantivanam of holding things loosely and learning from all of the traditions. So I was interested in where you would go with Hermitage because I found Shantivanam quite a busy place, and I was there peak season, and people were coming in and coming out, and it wasn't a place of Hermitage, perhaps, but you helped explain how that could be held. So I guess my appreciation
Yeah.
to that, and I like your comment about holding on too tightly to mental concepts.
Yeah. And thank you, Robert, for your question again. You know, Shantivanam, as I said earlier, it's not always packed and busy. It's only a few months we are really busy. Then we have a lot of time too. Well, coming back, either we become too loose of like accepting everything and nowhere. And that's also a danger where today, as well as we think of accepting everything, everything is okay, all right. But also we don't where we are nowhere. And there is another way to learn it, rooted and accepting everything. And that's an important aspect as well as to the Benedictine tradition. The stability here makes a very sensible way, a sensibility of being and embracing, not becoming and embracing. There is so much difference which we talked about. Again, ashram or again, I will also say even in the as again for Cyprian pointed out, even in the clumsy, noisy place, still you can be a hermit. Hermit, again, I would say that a solitude is a clarity of mind. It is not absence of nothing. A clarity of mind, you are in communion. Prayer is that which is not an absence of some words or something which you can think of, but it is being with everything. And that's supposed to be, again, even in the messy places where we should be able to really relate. And that's an important aspect. And here is also, as I said, that Accepting everything is not nowhere, but you can have your own tradition, your own values. But at the same time, that is not confining you. That is not creating a walls of you. Again, it is not, again, I accept that it is being in a sense, as a bridge in a sense. It is not that which is that you connect this and that, or you put it slightly, this is okay for me, but rather it is that it's already existing in that. But just I want to accept those realities. That's all. In that acceptance, as I said, it's a, as you said, or pointed out, that there is no contradiction at all. That's a truth which is there. I want to accept and go through that process. But rather, it's also, I would say, initially we need a place of silent solitude, which is not like a clumsy. Sometimes the mind need a certain way to reflect, a certain way to really distilled, the certain way to filter it out. And there, the noises are really a contradictions sometimes. But once you have that clarity, no noises can really an obstacle. And where we could, as I said, that where there is darkness, light shines. And that's supposed to be a true hermit. A true hermit, where there is no darkness, he's light there. It's not confusion. It's not a fear of afraid of that. And that's what the very cloth of the saffron represent. A burning seal. He burns everything, and he's a light for the world. So I would say that any hermetical practice is supposed to be end up there. It's not a tradition, which tradition we come from, but I would say that the light. So we should not be afraid of that confusion, problems, all around doubt, noises, but we need a kind of a personal encounter within our own self, and there we also find. And this is also a kind of a thing that the more we see outside a problem, I would definitely say there is a problem definitely in me. And this is the where we cannot relate, because we mirror each other. We mirror each other. And where we have that clarity and sensibility, even the problem is no more problem. You look at that, any great sages who went to the forest, who went to the caves, at a certain point, they were with the world. People flocked. Either they went out or the people flocked. Take about St. Benedict, take about Ramana Maharishi, even take about your own Charles. People flocked because that's what life means. That's what the nature of attraction means. It's that we cannot away from the world. We should be in the world, and we are the part of the world. So don't please make a wrong impression that which we can disconnect to the world. Yes, we need in a way that sometimes when we have this screening, clarity, discernment, we need. And then we should be in the part of the world. I think I hope to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we're just about on time, but I saw George Walls, one of our founding members of the Hermitage Society, had a question or a comment. So, George, you want to take us out tonight?
Yes, I wanted. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
I wanted to thank Father Cyprian and Dorathick. I just loved what you had to offer this evening, so thank you so much. There's a quote from Charles. I went often to Charles' doorstep to ask him, and he would feed me books, book after book to read. And one quote that he offered, I'd like both of you to speak to it. And he would sometimes say, "This is all you need to know." And it's from Thomas Merton. At the center of our being is a point of nothingness, which is untouched by sin and by illusion, a point of pure truth, a point or spark which belongs entirely to God, which is never at our disposal, from which God disposes of our lives, which is inaccessible to the fantasies of our own mind or the brutalities of our own will. This little point of nothingness and of absolute poverty is the pure glory of God in us. It is, so to speak, his name written in us as our poverty, as our indigence, as our dependence, as our sonship. It is like a pure diamond blazing with the invisible light of heaven. It is in everybody, and if we could see it, we would see these billions of points of light coming together in the face and blaze of a sun that would make all the darkness and cruelty of life vanish completely. I have no program for this seeing. It is only given, but the gate of heaven is everywhere.
Thank you. George, Dorathick has to run and lead a retreat.
Oh,
And so
okay.
I've just, we've come up to the end and we just have to let Dorathick, because he's been so gracious with his time. Thank you so much.
Yes,
That
Please.
was a beautiful way to
Yes.
end, though. What's a gorgeous quote.
Absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to cut off the Zoom, so we can still
I've
let
got to
that
go as
sit.
well.
Okay.
Yeah.
I leave it there
Okay.
then, and I
Dorathick, great
thank
to
you
see
so
you,
much.
brother.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
Well, we're
My-
going to let our speakers go, and then I'm going to wrap up with a few words.
I
Please
think
go.
that quote also Father Bede mentioned in the
Yeah.
Cosmic Revelation, where he also points out the same thing in another way, where also the Upanishad really reflects the same thing. The Atman, which is in us, never can be corrupted, which can not be taken away. Only it reflects. So once, as George was pointing out, once you really come out, that you see everything like that. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Dorathick.
All
My
right.
greetings,
Thank you
everybody.
so
Thank you.
much.
Bye, man.
Thank you, Jason. I'm
Yes.
sorry
Thank
for
you.
the
It's
inconvenience
okay.
of my communication.
No problem.
Well, we'll talk about that
Amazing.
later.
Acknowledge. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. We are going to wrap things up, even though Father Cyprian and Dorathick have to go. Please, Father Cyprian,
Okay.
please go ahead. Thank you.
Goodbyes. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so
Bless you.
much. All right. Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks everyone for being here with us tonight. The Hermitage Society is in Black Creek. We'd love to have you come by and visit. We have 3 more talks in the series, so please, you can use that same link to join us in the future, and we'll send out reminders about that. The best way to stay in touch with the society is to join the newsletter on the website, charlesbrandt.ca. And we try not to send out a ton of email, but we definitely let you know when things are happening. While Emily's resident, there'll be a couple more meditations, in-person meditations at the Hermitage. Emily, what's the next date?
March 14th.
March 14th is the next meditation in person. I'll send those out. And I would just invite everyone to reflect on your own relationship with silence and solitude. You don't necessarily need a place far away or exotic in the Himalayas or in Black Creek, British Columbia. But getting in touch with that still point at the center of our being is a pathway to the divine. And I think that's what the hermit traditions of all of the world's religions can teach us. So I would invite you into that relationship with silence and solitude from whatever vantage and place that you're in. And to please keep in touch. And I hope to see you for the next talk. All right. I'll stick around after I stop recording if anyone wants to say hello. And otherwise, I wish you a good evening and a good week.